This isn't a story about a developing nation struggling to find its footing. It's a forensic examination of the wealthiest nation that ever existed on this planet. We're going to dissect a crime scene today, a financial autopsy of how an entire society, flush with more money per person than any country in history, managed to completely and systematically destroy itself. And they did it in less time than it takes to pay off a standard 30-year mortgage. If you've ever operated under the assumption that accumulating wealth is the same thing as accumulating safety, you need to pay very close attention to what happened here.
They were the richest people on Earth. And then, 20 years later, they couldn't afford to bury their dead. Really consider the gravity of that math. This isn't a piece of speculative fiction. This is the cold, unavoidable mathematics of a system that completely ignored its own mortality. What we're looking at is the absolute destruction of a society's infrastructure, its wealth, and its future. People always assume that financial ruin on this kind of scale requires a war, a natural disaster, or some unprecedented global crisis. But it doesn't. The most terrifying collapses are the ones orchestrated from the inside, in broad daylight, while everyone is cheering.
So how exactly do you lose 90% of a country's entire economy and still have the nerve to call it an accident? Well, you don't. It's never an accident. It is always a slow, methodical removal of the one thing anyone actually needed to check. As we walk through this autopsy, I want you to keep this massive, catastrophic failure at the forefront of your mind. We're going to isolate the exact mechanism that caused this, because the mechanism that destroyed them is not unique to them.
To fully grasp the scale of the collapse, you first have to understand the height of the illusion. On one side of the ledger, you had the absolute peak. They were millionaires seemingly overnight. There were zero taxes. Healthcare was entirely free. Housing was free. Education was free. Now consider the other side of that exact same ledger, just a mere blink of an eye later in historical terms. Complete and utter ruin. The nation was bankrupt. Its physical environment was literally poisoned, and its people were entirely dependent on foreign aid just to survive. An entire population walked blindly off a cliff, entirely convinced they were just taking another step upward.
This timeline isn't just a history lesson, it's a burning fuse. In 1798, a British ship stumbled upon this tiny speck in the Pacific and dubbed it Pleasant Island. Nobody really thought twice about it, but by the early 1900s, it was discovered that nearly the entire island was composed of solid phosphate, which is one of the most valuable fertilizer ingredients on Earth. In 1968, they gained independence and full control of this massive resource boom. By 1981, they hit their peak economic GDP. They had a resource so rich they didn't think they needed a real economy, and they certainly didn't think they needed a plan. But by 2001, absolute bankruptcy. The fuse finally reached the powder keg.
Let's look at the numbers. By 1981, the GDP per person hit $27,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's over $88,000 in today's money. That was double what the average American was making at the exact same time. The government was buying fleets of luxury cars. For a population so small, you could fit every single citizen comfortably inside one football stadium. But beneath the surface of this staggering wealth, a fatal psychological trap had been set. Nobody was saving a dime, nobody was diversifying, and absolutely nobody believed the money would ever stop flowing.
Here is the terminal diagnosis. The wealth they were experiencing had a mandatory expiration date built into it from day one. You see, mining phosphate isn't a business, it's a deposit. And a deposit, by definition, is a finite accumulation of a natural resource. Unlike a renewable business that can adapt, innovate, and grow indefinitely, a deposit has a strict mathematical expiration date. The fatal flaw of this entire nation was treating a finite deposit of rock as if it were an infinite business model. They completely confused liquidating an asset with generating an income.
Mathematics, unfortunately, doesn't care about your lifestyle. Eventually, the mining began to slow. The ground was hollowed out. The mathematical timer was rapidly nearing zero. And this is exactly when the pathology of collapse shifts from ignorance into outright panic. We enter what I call the desperation phase. When a single-source economy realizes its days are numbered, it doesn't slowly and rationally scale back its expenses. It does something much more dangerous. It tries to gamble its way out of the inevitable. This frantic behavior took hold almost immediately. Just consider this rap sheet of cascading organ failure. The government sank tens of millions of dollars into a failed London musical, desperately hoping for a miraculous return. They poured astronomical sums into phantom shell trust funds that quietly evaporated right into the pockets of international con artists. Their own national airline had its planes repossessed mid-route, leaving their citizens stranded on foreign tarmacs. Ultimately, all of this led to the complete and total collapse of the central bank. Each of these decisions might have been rationalized at the time, but together they were just the final ticks of a countdown.
Wealth that depends on one unshakable source isn't wealth, it's a timer. This is the fundamental, uncompromising truth of our entire analysis today. If your financial survival relies on a single pillar, you aren't wealthy, you're simply waiting. And the tragedy of human psychology is that most people refuse to check that timer until it's already sitting at 0. By 2001, the phosphate was completely gone, the money was gone, and the illusion was permanently shattered.
Now we're going to pivot away from this ruined island. I want to point this interrogation directly at you. Consider the modern worker. They have a normal job, they have normal savings, they pay their taxes, they do everything right except for one glaring omission. They never ask what happens when the one thing making them money disappears. The government of our anonymous island never asked this question, and the modern worker rarely asks it either.
If you're sitting there thinking this is purely a historical anomaly, consider the reality of 2024. More than 60% of American households have absolutely no diversified income stream outside of their primary job or a single appreciating asset. 60%. The vast majority of the modern economy is making the exact same one-source bet that destroyed an entire nation. They're operating with the exact same fatal blind spot.
Entire regions of the modern economy are running on the fumes of this psychological trap. Real estate portfolios that rely entirely on an endlessly rising market. Tech valuations completely divorced from actual revenue, relying on one single employer for your health, your housing, and your sustenance. Living in a one-industry town, the assets look different, sure, but the structural fragility is identical. When the market shifts, when the algorithm changes, when that singular resource dries up, the illusion of safety evaporates instantly.
Back in 1981, the tiny island nation of Nauru had 200% of the average global income and zero backup plan. Today, the modern household makes the exact same one resource bet. It's just spread across entire continents instead of a solitary Pacific island. This happened in 1929, it happened in 1971, it happened in 2008, and it happened in Nauru. The names of the assets change, the years change, the geopolitical boundaries change, but the pattern of human behavior? That never does.
Here is the bleak, final reality of Nauru. The richest people on Earth defeated not by a foreign army, but by arithmetic. Today, their physical environment is a gutted, uninhabitable wasteland of jagged limestone. To generate any income at all, this once proud nation survives by renting its remaining land to another government, serving as an offshore detention center for the very country that originally colonized it. They've returned to total dependency, completely trapped by the mathematical consequences of their own short-sightedness.
The question is no longer whether a single point of failure can wipe out decades of unprecedented wealth. We know for a fact that it can, and we know that it does. The only question that matters now is whether you would recognize your own single point of failure if you were standing in the middle of it right now. The warning signs are always there. The timer is always ticking, but most people will simply choose to ignore it until the math runs out.